Imagine ruling an entire kingdom, making decisions that affect thousands of lives, but only for a single day. What could possibly happen in 24 hours that would change the course of history forever? This is the story of a king who ruled for just one day, and his brief reign has left a legacy that continues to spark curiosity and wonder. Join us as we uncover the truth behind this fascinating tale. In the long and often tumultuous history of monarchies, where kings and queens have ruled for decades, even centuries, there is one story that stands out as both extraordinary and baffling. It's the story of King Louis XIX of France, a man who ascended the throne only to rule for a mere 20 minutes. The story begins in the year 1830, during a time of political unrest in France. The monarchy under King Charles X had grown increasingly unpopular. The French people were tired of the old regime, and revolts had been brewing for months. Charles X had imposed a series of reactionary measures, including restricting the press, dissolving the newly elected Chamber of Deputies, and limiting voting rights. These actions sparked widespread protests, and the situation quickly escalated into the July Revolution of 1830. On July 26, 1830, Charles signed the controversial ordinances that led to riots in Paris. The French army, traditionally loyal to the monarchy, was unable or unwilling to suppress the uprisings. By the 29th of July, the revolution had reached its peak. Paris was in chaos, and the king, now deeply isolated, found himself with few choices. Realizing that his reign was over, Charles X made the fateful decision to abdicate. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. He didn't just abdicate in favor of his son, as was the custom. Instead, Charles X passed the throne to his grandson, Henry, Duke of Bordeaux, who was only 10 years old at the time. But due to the overwhelming pressure from the revolutionaries and the growing instability, Henry was never actually able to ascend to the throne in any meaningful way. Instead, his uncle, Louis Philippe, took advantage of the power vacuum and quickly positioned himself as a constitutional monarch, seizing the throne and thus beginning the reign of the July monarchy. As a result, Louis XIX, who was briefly crowned king, never actually had the chance to rule. His reign was mere minutes-long minutes, during which his fate and the future of the French monarchy was sealed. The transition was swift, with Louis Philippe stepping in to take control. The reign of Louis XIX was so short that even official records often omit his time on the throne entirely. The title King Louis XIX exists, but it is almost forgotten by the world today, overshadowed by the longer, more notable reigns that followed. What remains fascinating, however, is the ripple effect this one-day reign had on the French monarchy. The entire episode marks a crucial turning point in French history. The monarchy was no longer an unchallenged institution of power, and its role in shaping the nation's future would change forever. The revolution had demonstrated that the French people had the power to bring down a king, no matter how long he had ruled. This brief and strange chapter in history serves as a reminder of how quickly things can change, how the course of a nation's future can hinge on a single day. But perhaps, more than anything, it reminds us that sometimes the shortest reigns are the ones that make the longest lasting impact. Although Louis XIX's reign was only minutes long, the man who briefly held the crown has an interesting backstory that sheds light on the fragility of royal power during times of revolution. Born as Louis Antoine, Duke of Anjou, he was the son of Charles X and the grandson of the famous Louis XVI, who was executed during the French Revolution. Louis XIX was born into a tumultuous period of French history, where the monarchy was constantly under threat from both internal and external forces. But despite his noble lineage, his path to the throne was far from assured. Louis XIX was, in many ways, a man caught between two worlds. On the one hand, he was a royal heir, trained in the ways of kingship and expected to uphold the traditions of the Bourbon dynasty. On the other, he was a man living in a country that had been deeply scarred by revolution and republicanism. The fall of his grandfather, Louis XVI, and the subsequent overthrow of the monarchy in 1792 had left a permanent mark on the French royal family. Louis Antoine grew up during the tumultuous years of Napoleon's rule, and his father, Charles X, would eventually seek to restore the monarchy after Napoleon's fall, an effort that ended with the July Revolution of 1830. When Charles X was forced to abdicate in 1830, Louis XIX was thrust into a position of power, albeit in a moment of intense political upheaval. His reign was not something that he actively sought. In fact, it was his father who made the decision to hand over the throne to Louis XIX, despite the growing instability. However, the revolutionaries were not willing to accept another Bourbon king so easily. Louis XIX, while technically crowned king, was not even given the chance to sit on the throne in any meaningful way. The rapidly changing political environment of the time meant that his reign was destined to be a brief, fleeting event. One of the most fascinating aspects of Louis XIX's brief time as king is that, during the entire 20-minute reign, he had no real power. His position as king was symbolic, and his reign was effectively a casualty of the forces of change sweeping through France. Louis XIX's father, Charles X, had been a deeply unpopular monarch, known for his conservative policies, which had alienated large sections of the French population. This deeply divided France, leading to the eventual revolution that brought Louis XIX's reign to an abrupt halt. In a way, Louis XIX's reign symbolized the decline of the old monarchy. By the time he was king, the monarchy had already been rendered largely powerless by revolutionary forces and growing republican sentiment. The French people had seen how monarchs like his grandfather and father had been unable to maintain their power in the face of rising discontent, and now Louis XIX was merely a figurehead in a game of political chess. Though he never had the opportunity to make any decisions as king, Louis XIX did leave behind a legacy of sorts. His very brief reign highlighted how fragile the concept of kingship had become in France. No longer could a king take power and hold on to it for life. The monarchy was no longer an institution of unchallenged authority. As a result, the July Revolution ushered in a new era in French politics, one in which the monarchy would be relegated to a symbolic role and republicanism would continue to gain strength. Despite his fleeting moment in history, Louis XIX was a part of a larger story, the story of a monarchy in decline and a nation struggling to determine its future. His reign, though short and largely inconsequential, still serves as a fascinating reminder of how quickly power can shift, and how even the most storied dynasties can be toppled in a matter of hours. The idea of a king ruling for only a single day may seem absurd, but in the case of Louis XIX, it was the sad reality of a monarchy that had already passed its prime. Though Louis XIX's reign was brief, his story continues to resonate in the annals of history, serving as a poignant reminder of the fragility of power and the volatility of royal dynasties. The abrupt end of his reign symbolizes a critical turning point in French history, a moment when the monarchy, an institution that had once seemed untouchable, finally crumbled under the weight of revolution. But what is the lasting legacy of a king who ruled for just one day? First and foremost, Louis XIX's reign marks the end of the Bourbon dynasty's influence over France. Though his father, Charles X, attempted to maintain royal authority, his forced abdication in Louis XIX's 20-minute reign revealed how powerless the monarchy had become in the face of mounting popular opposition. For generations, the French royal family had ruled with an unquestioned grip on power. But by 1830, this system of rule had been irreversibly challenged. With the July Revolution, the French people made it clear that no monarch, no matter how long they had sat on the throne, was safe from the forces of change. The legacy of Louis XIX's brief reign is also intertwined with the idea of a constitutional monarchy. After his abdication, his uncle, Louis Philippe, ascended to the throne and became the first king of the French, rather than king of France, a subtle yet significant change. Under the new monarchy, the king's powers were restricted by a constitution, and the country was headed toward a system of governance that allowed for greater popular participation. Though Louis Philippe's rule also ended in revolution in 1848, his ascension to the throne following Louis XIX's short reign symbolizes a shift in political power, from absolute monarchy to a more limited form of governance. Another lasting impact of Louis XIX's reign is the role it played in shaping public opinion about the monarchy. The rapid downfall of the Bourbon family, and the fact that Louis XIX never even had the opportunity to rule, had a lasting effect on how the French viewed the concept of monarchy. It became evident that the monarchy was no longer a stable or trustworthy institution. The French public, particularly the middle and lower classes, began to question the legitimacy of royal authority. The events of 1830 fueled republican sentiments, and for many, the idea of a monarchy, especially one as disconnected from the people as the Bourbon family, became increasingly obsolete. However, it is not just the political changes of the time that contributed to the legacy of Louis XIX. His reign also serves as a historical curiosity that continues to fascinate scholars and history enthusiasts alike. The notion of a king who ruled for only 20 minutes is almost unbelievable, and it stands as a symbol of how quickly the tides of history can turn. Louis XIX, though never truly given the chance to rule, is remembered in textbooks and documentaries as a king who embodied the fragility of power. The legacy of Louis XIX is not one of great accomplishments or vast influence. Rather, his place in history serves as a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of political power and the sometimes fleeting nature of royal authority. In many ways, his story is a metaphor for the end of an era. A world where monarchs were once seen as divine rulers, only to be replaced by more democratic systems of government. In the end, Louis XIX's reign, though short-lived, left a lasting impression on the history of France and the monarchy. His story reminds us that power can shift in an instant, and that the course of history is often shaped not by those who rule for years or decades, but by those who experience fleeting moments of influence in the face of overwhelming change. His reign was brief, but it stands as a powerful reminder of how quickly a dynasty can fade, and how the people, not kings, often hold the true power to determine the future. Imagine standing at the crossroads of history, where a single day of reign could reshape a nation's future. Louis XIX may have ruled for only 20 minutes, but his story is a powerful reminder that power can shift in the blink of an eye. Want to dive deeper into the fascinating world of history's most unexpected moments? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more jaw-dropping tales from the past. Join us on this journey through time, because you never know when the next 20-minute king will rise.